Ever wonder what your grandmother had to check off her list to be considered marriage material? Not her dreams, not her ambitions, but whether she could fold a fitted sheet into a perfect square and have dinner on the table at exactly 6 o'clock. The 1970s weren't that long ago. Your parents were probably dating then, maybe even getting married. But the expectations placed on women, particularly wives, existed in a completely different universe from the one we inhabit today. There were actual checklists, printed in magazines, whispered between mothers and daughters, implied in every advice column and home economics class. These weren't suggestions, they were requirements. And if you were a woman hoping to be seen as a good wife, you learned them, practiced them, and performed them like your entire identity depended on it. Because, in many ways, it did. Let's walk through this checklist together, item by item, and see just how much the world has shifted beneath our feet. You were expected to have breakfast ready before your husband woke up, not breakfast prepared, ready, the coffee percolating, filling the kitchen with that rich, bitter aroma that meant morning had officially started. The eggs in the pan, butter sizzling, turning golden at the edges, toast in the toaster, waiting for the precise moment he walked into the kitchen so it would emerge warm, never cold. Bacon laid out on paper towels, grease blotting into perfect circles. The table set with the good plates, a folded napkin, the newspaper ironed. Yes, ironed, so the ink wouldn't smudge on his fingers. You'd be standing there in your housecoat, hair already done, lipstick already on, smiling as he entered the room like a game show host revealing the grand prize. The message was clear. His day began smoothly because you had already been awake for an hour making sure of it. Today, couples argue over who forgot to start the coffee maker the night before. Back then, forgetting wasn't an option. It was a failure. Can you imagine setting an alarm for 5:30 every single morning just to prove you were worthy of being married? You always had to look presentable before he came home from work. And presentable had a very specific definition. It meant you'd already changed out of whatever you'd worn during the day. The clothes that might have flour on them from baking, or dirt from gardening, or stains from cleaning. You put on a fresh dress, something flattering, something that showed. You'd made an effort. You touched up your makeup. You brushed your hair, maybe even reset your curlers if you'd taken them out earlier. You applied a fresh layer of lipstick in a shade that complemented your outfit, a spritz of perfume at your wrists and neck. You checked yourself in the mirror, adjusting your collar, smoothing your skirt. And then you waited. You'd hear the car pull into the driveway, the engine cutting off, his footsteps on the walkway, and you'd position yourself somewhere visible, near the door, in the living room, apron removed and folded neatly away, ready to greet him with a smile. The unspoken rule? He should never see you looking tired, disheveled, or like you'd actually worked all day, even though you had. Even though you'd scrubbed floors and washed windows and chased children and prepared an entire meal from scratch. Your exhaustion was supposed to be invisible. Today we're lucky if we change out of sweatpants for a Zoom call. How would you feel if your worth was measured by whether you'd applied mascara before someone walked through the door? Dinner had to be ready precisely when he arrived home, time to the minute. This wasn't just about having food prepared, it was about orchestration. You had to calculate backwards from his expected arrival time, factoring in how long each dish would take, coordinating multiple pots on the stove, timing the oven so the roast would be perfectly browned, the potatoes fluffy, the vegetables tender, but not mushy. If he typically walked through the door at 6:15, dinner needed to be plated and on the table by 6:20. Not 6:30, not in a few minutes. Now, the pot roast still steaming, releasing that deep, savory smell of meat and carrots and onions that had been braising for hours. The mashed potatoes whipped smooth with butter and cream. A small well in the center waiting for gravy. The green beans glistening with bacon fat. The rolls golden and warm in a basket lined with a cloth napkin. Everything hot, everything ready, everything timed to his schedule, not yours. If he was late, you kept it warm, checking obsessively to make sure nothing dried out. If he was early, you scrambled, apologizing for the delay even though you'd been cooking for 2 hours straight. Today we eat dinner whenever we're hungry, sometimes at 8, sometimes at 10, sometimes standing over the sink. Back then, that flexibility didn't exist. Does the idea of your entire evening revolving around someone else's commute make your chest feel tight? You were never supposed to complain about your day or burden him with problems. He'd been at work, you see, real work, the kind that happened in an office or a factory, the kind that came with a paycheck and therefore had value. Your day, wrangling toddlers who refused to nap, scrubbing crayon off walls, grocery shopping with 3 kids in tow, hand-washing every dish because the dishwasher was broken, ironing his shirts while a baby screamed in the background. That didn't count as hard. That was just what you did. So, when he came home, you smiled. You asked about his day. You listened as he talked about his boss, his colleagues, his frustrations, nodding sympathetically, offering encouragement. And when he finished and maybe, just maybe, asked about yours, you said, "Oh, fine. Nothing special." You didn't mention that the washing machine flooded the basement. You didn't mention that your back ached from carrying laundry baskets up and down stairs. You didn't mention that you'd been touched, grabbed, and kneaded by small humans for 12 straight hours, and you hadn't had a single moment alone, not even in the bathroom. You kept it light. You kept it pleasant. You kept it to yourself. Today, we call this emotional labor and recognize it as exhausting. Back then, it was called being a good wife. What would you have done with all those swallowed words? The house had to be immaculate at all times, as if a cleaning crew had just left. We're talking about a level of clean that required constant vigilance. The kitchen floor mopped every morning until it gleamed, the grout between tiles scrubbed with a toothbrush, the counters wiped down after every single use, not a crumb left behind. The living room vacuumed daily, those perfect parallel lines in the carpet that showed you'd run the vacuum in systematic rows, not just hit the high-traffic areas. The furniture dusted, the cushions fluffed and arranged just so, each throw pillow placed at the exact angle it had been positioned the day before. The bathroom sink scrubbed until the porcelain shone, the chrome fixtures polished until you could see your reflection. No water spots, no soap scum, no toothpaste residue. The toilet bowl blue with cleaner, the bath mat hung to dry, the towels folded in perfect thirds on the rack. And this wasn't for company. This was every single day, just in case someone dropped by unannounced. Because that's what people did in, not the 70s. They dropped by. And if your house wasn't perfect, if there were dishes in the sink or toys scattered across the floor, you'd failed. The judgment would be immediate and silent, but you'd feel it. Today we have lived-in homes, spaces that look like actual people inhabit them. Back then, your home was your report card, and everyone was grading. How long would you last maintaining that standard before you cracked? You were supposed to have his slippers ready by the door, waiting like patient pets. This detail sounds almost comical now, doesn't it? But it was real. The expectation was that the moment he walked through the door, briefcase in hand, face tired from his commute, he could step out of his work shoes, those stiff leather Oxfords that had carried him through his day, and slide his feet into something soft. Slippers that you'd placed there that morning, or checked on throughout the day to make sure they hadn't been moved. Maybe they were the brown corduroy ones with the rubber soles, or the plaid ones lined with fleece, or the leather moccasin style that looked distinguished, even in repose. The gesture was symbolic, you see. It said, you've entered a space where you can relax, where you're taken care of, where someone has thought about your comfort before you even asked for it. It said, this is your castle, and I'm here to serve. Today we leave our shoes wherever they land, sometimes kicked off halfway across the room, and nobody's waiting at the door with alternative footwear. Does this image make you feel nostalgic or claustrophobic? Children needed to be quiet, clean, and preferably out of sight when father came home. This one cuts deep because it reveals something painful about family dynamics in that era. Children weren't meant to be children in those precious evening hours. They were meant to be decorative, manageable, convenient, so you'd spend the hour before he arrived in a controlled frenzy, washing faces and hands at the kitchen sink, scrubbing behind ears, wiping away the evidence of the day's adventures, changing them out of their play clothes, the grass-stained pants, the shirt with jelly smeared down the front, into something clean and neat, combing hair, fixing barrettes, tucking in shirts. And then the lecture. Daddy's had a long day. We need to be quiet. We need to be good. Go play in your room. You'd usher them away, these small humans bursting with stories about the caterpillar they found or the fort they built, and you'd shush them. Tell Daddy later. Not now. Sometimes they'd be allowed out for a brief appearance at dinner, sitting up straight, using their best manners, speaking only when spoken to, little performers in the theater of family life. And if they were too loud, too wild, too much themselves, the blame fell on you. You weren't managing them properly. You weren't doing your job. Today we celebrate chaos. We share videos of dinner table mayhem. We accept that kids are loud and messy and present. What do you think those children learned about their place in the family? You were expected to prepare his plate and serve him first before anyone else ate. This wasn't about politeness. It was about hierarchy. You'd spent the afternoon cooking, timing everything perfectly, and when the meal was finally ready, when the food was at its absolute peak, you didn't sit down. You stood at the counter or the stove, and you filled his plate first. The best cut of meat went to him, the crispiest piece of chicken, the center slice of the roast where it was most tender. You'd arrange it carefully, making sure the portions looked generous, that the colors were appealing, that the gravy was drizzled just right. You'd carry it to his place at the head of the table, set it down in front of him, and only then would you serve the children. Smaller portions, the pieces that were slightly less perfect. And yourself? You served yourself last, taking whatever remained, and it was usually less, sometimes significantly less. You'd sit down with your plate half the size of his, and you'd eat quickly, ready to jump up if anyone needed anything. More water? Another roll? A second helping? You were waitress, chef, and last priority all at once. Today we serve ourselves buffet style, everyone grabbing what they want, fighting over the last piece of garlic bread. How would it feel to always eat last, to always get the leftovers of your own cooking? The television was his domain, and you didn't change the channel without permission. Picture this: you're folding laundry in the living room while the TV plays in the background. Maybe you've been half watching a show you enjoy, something light and cheerful that makes the tedious work of matching socks more bearable. Then he comes home, settles into his armchair, the good one, the one that's basically his throne, and reaches for the remote. Click. The channel changes to the news, or a western, or whatever sports game is on that evening. You don't say anything. You don't protest. Your show vanishes mid-scene, and you'll never know how it ended because you certainly won't ask to change it back. The TV schedule revolved around his preferences. If he wanted to watch the game, everyone watched the game, or at least the TV stayed on the game while you busied yourself with other tasks in the same room. If you wanted to watch something specific, you'd need to ask permission, frame it carefully, maybe wait until he was in a good mood, or suggest it on a night when there wasn't anything he wanted to see. And even then, he might say yes, but clearly be doing you a favor, sighing loudly, or reading the newspaper with obvious disinterest while your program played. The message was clear. This box, this entertainment, this leisure time, it belonged to him. Today we have multiple screens, streaming on demand, watching different shows in different rooms, arguments over whose turn it is to pick. Can you imagine needing permission just to see how your favorite story ended? You were supposed to anticipate his needs before he voiced them. This required a particular kind of vigilance, an almost psychic awareness of another person's desires. You learned to read the smallest signals. The way he shifted in his chair meant he wanted a refill on his coffee. The way he glanced toward the window meant he was thinking about the lawn, and you should probably mention that you'd already called someone about the broken mower. The way he rubbed his temples meant a headache was coming, and you should quietly retrieve the aspirin and a glass of water before he asked. You learned his patterns, his preferences, his moods. You knew that on Wednesdays he liked pot roast. You knew that after a bad day at work he preferred silence to conversation. You knew that when he loosened his tie in that particular way, he was frustrated, and you should stay cheerful but unobtrusive. You became a student of one person, earning a PhD in the subject of him. And when you got it right, when you handed him the evening paper before he reached for it, when you'd already recorded his favorite show, when dinner included that side dish he'd mentioned liking 3 months ago, you got nothing. No acknowledgement. That was simply what you were supposed to do. But when you got it wrong, when you failed to anticipate correctly, the disappointment was palpable. Today we're told that expecting your partner to read your mind is unreasonable and unhealthy. What did it cost women to make themselves that small, that attentive, that invisible? Your opinions on major decisions were welcomed only if they aligned with his. Let's talk about money, about purchases, about the big choices that shaped your life. That new car the family needed? He decided which one, what color, when to buy it. Your input might be solicited. What do you think, honey? But it was performative. If you suggested the station wagon for its practicality and he wanted the sedan, you'd be getting the sedan. That vacation destination? He'd spread out the brochures, but your preference for the beach house would lose to his preference for the fishing cabin. And forget about major purchases. The new refrigerator, the furniture for the living room, the decision to renovate the kitchen. These discussions happened, but they weren't equal partnerships. You could state your case, present your reasoning, even show him the research you'd done. But ultimately, he made the final call. After all, he earned the money. That paycheck was his, even though your unpaid labor made it possible for him to earn it. If you pushed too hard, voiced your opinion too strongly, you weren't being a team player. You were being difficult, challenging, unwomanly. So you learned to present your preferences as suggestions, to frame your desires as simply supporting whatever he wanted, to quietly drop your own wishes into conversations as if they just occurred to you. and weren't really that important anyway. Today we talk about financial equality in marriage, joint decision-making, equal partnerships, how many dreams got filed away as not worth the argument. You kept all marriage problems private, never complaining to friends or family. The concept of venting, of seeking support, of processing your frustrations with someone who might understand. That didn't exist. Not really. What happened in your marriage stayed in your marriage. If he criticized you, belittled you, ignored you, disappointed you, hurt you, you smiled through it in public. You attended dinner parties and laughed at his jokes, even the ones at your expense. You stood beside him at neighborhood gatherings and played the role of contented wife, nodding along while he told stories that made him look good and you look foolish. At church on Sunday, you sat in the pew with your hands folded, the picture of domestic harmony. And when your mother called and asked how you were doing, you said, "Everything's fine." When your best friend from high school visited and noticed you seemed tired, worn down, different somehow, you blamed it on the kids, on being busy, on anything except the truth. Because admitting your marriage wasn't perfect meant failure. It meant you'd failed at the one job that mattered most. Other women seemed to manage just fine, or at least they claimed to. They all wore the same mask you wore, each one believing she was the only one struggling, the only one faking it. The isolation was crushing. Today we have therapy, support groups, friends who listen without judgment, social media communities where people share their real experiences. What festered in all that silence? Your own hobbies and interests came last, if they came at all. Remember the things you loved before marriage? Maybe you painted, your fingers stained with oils and acrylics, lost in the colors on canvas. Maybe you played piano, those hours of practice creating something beautiful. Maybe you wrote, filling notebooks with stories and poems and thoughts that were entirely your own. Maybe you had a career you were passionate about, or dreams of going back to school, or a business idea that lit you up when you talked about it. All of that got shelved, not intentionally abandoned. You told yourself it was temporary, just until the kids were older, just until things settled down, just until there was time. But there was never time. Your days were consumed by everyone else's needs, and by the time evening came, you were too exhausted to pick up that paintbrush, or sit at that piano, or open that notebook. Your hobbies became guilty pleasures you squeezed into stolen moments. Maybe you'd read a few pages of a novel while the pot roast cooked, but you'd feel anxious the whole time, like you should be doing something more productive. Maybe you'd work on that craft project for 30 minutes after everyone went to bed, your eyes burning with fatigue. And if he ever caught you engaged in something just for yourself, there was often that look. Not hostile exactly, but questioning. What are you doing? Don't you have other things you should be doing? The implication that your personal fulfillment was selfish, indulgent, less important than everything else. Today we talk about self-care and maintaining your identity outside of your roles. How many talents died from neglect? You were expected to maintain your figure and appearance as if aging and childbirth didn't exist. This one deserves a moment of silence for the sheer audacity of it. You'd grown humans inside your body. You'd pushed those humans out, your body tearing and stretching and fundamentally changing in ways that couldn't be undone. You'd fed those humans from your own body, your breasts swelling and shrinking, stretched skin that wouldn't quite snap back. You had marks now, silver lines across your stomach, looser skin, a softness that hadn't been there before. Your body had literally created life multiple times and it showed. But you were supposed to look like it hadn't happened. You were supposed to squeeze back into your pre-pregnancy clothes, watch every calorie, exercise in secret because gyms weren't really for women yet, so you do those Jane Fonda routines in your living room after everyone left. You dyed away the gray hairs that appeared in your 30s. You wore girdles, those uncomfortable torture devices that compressed everything into a smoother silhouette under your clothes. You studied the magazines that showed you how to hide your problem areas, your thighs, your arms, your stomach, and heaven forbid you let yourself go, because that meant you'd stop trying, stopped caring about being attractive for him. Meanwhile, he developed a paunch, his hairline receded, and nobody said a word. Today we celebrate body positivity, postpartum bodies, aging naturally. Does it make you angry or sad or both? You were supposed to manage the household budget he provided without ever asking for more. He'd hand you the household allowance, maybe weekly, maybe monthly, and that was your operating fund for everything. Groceries, cleaning supplies, children's clothes, school supplies, household repairs, birthday gifts. Everything the family needed had to come out of that fixed amount. You became a mathematician by necessity, calculating prices in your head as you shopped, comparing costs per ounce, clipping coupons from the Sunday paper, and organizing them in a little accordion folder. You knew which store had the best prices on meat, which day they marked down the produce when the sales rotated. You'd stretch hamburger into 3 different meals. You'd darn socks instead of buying new ones. You'd make the kids' Halloween costumes from old bedsheets, and your own creativity because store-bought wasn't in the budget. And if you ran short before the next allowance, you figured it out. You borrowed from next month's budget. You made do. You went without. What you didn't do was ask for more money, because that meant you'd failed at managing what you'd been given. Never mind that prices went up, that kids grew out of shoes at alarming rates, that the washing machine broke and needed repair. You were supposed to make it work. Meanwhile, he had his own money he didn't account for, money he could spend on lunches out and drinks with colleagues and that new fishing rod. Today we have joint bank accounts, transparent finances, equal access to marital money. How creative did you have to become when creativity was all you could afford? Thank you notes had to be written within 24 hours of receiving any gift. Hospitality wasn't casual, it was a performance art, and you were the choreographer, the director, and the lead performer all at once. Someone gave you a wedding gift? You sat down that very evening, pulled out your good stationery, cream-colored, maybe with your new married initials embossed at the top, and wrote a note in your best penmanship. Not just thanks for the toaster, but a proper thank you note with specific details about how much you loved the gift, how you'd already used it, how thoughtful they were to choose it. Someone invited you to dinner? You wrote a note thanking them for their hospitality, complimenting specific dishes, mentioning how lovely the evening was. And you didn't just write these notes, you hand-delivered them or mailed them promptly. This wasn't optional. This was social currency, proof that you'd been raised properly, that you knew how to conduct yourself in polite society. Your mother-in-law would judge you on this. The neighbors would notice if you were lax. Other women would whisper if you didn't keep up with correspondence. You had a mental filing system of every social obligation, every gift received, every kindness shown, and you reciprocated with mathematical precision. Today we send quick text messages. Thanks so much, sometimes days or weeks later, often with emojis. Would you trade the convenience for the lost art of those careful, handwritten words? The kitchen was exclusively your territory, and his attempts to help were discouraged. This sounds positive at first, your own domain, until you realize it was a cage disguised as a kingdom. The kitchen was yours because cooking, cleaning, and managing food was your responsibility, your burden, your endless job. Every meal, every day, forever. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, plus snacks for the kids, plus that elaborate Sunday dinner if family visited, plus baking cookies for the school fundraiser, plus canning vegetables in summer, plus preparing dishes to bring to church potlucks. The kitchen work never ended, and if he wandered in on a Saturday afternoon, maybe feeling helpful, maybe offering to cook dinner, you'd smile and gently redirect him. That's so sweet, honey, but I've got it under control. Not because you didn't want help, but because the social conditioning was powerful. A man cooking implied his wife couldn't handle her duties. The neighbors might see him at the grill and think you were sick or incompetent. His mother might hear about it and call with concern, wondering if you were okay. Plus, and this was the secret part you couldn't say out loud, he'd mess up your system. He didn't know where anything went. He'd use the wrong pan, leave a disaster for you to clean, cook something that didn't match the side dishes you'd already prepared. It was genuinely easier to just do it yourself, which was exactly the trap. You were so efficient, so capable, so well-trained that asking for help felt harder than just shouldering the entire load. Today men cook, we share kitchen duties, we celebrate dads who meal plan. How heavy was that crown in your exclusive kingdom? You were expected to maintain relationships with his extended family, even if they were difficult. Your in-laws weren't just his family, they became your responsibility. You remembered all the birthdays, bought all the gifts, signed his name on all the cards. You organized the visits, coordinated the holiday schedules, managed the delicate politics of whose house to visit for which holiday. You were the one who called his mother every Sunday, making pleasant conversation about nothing in particular while you cooked dinner and wiped counters and prevented the children from killing each other. You were the one who bit your tongue when his mother criticized your housekeeping, your cooking, your child rearing, your appearance. That's just how she is, he'd say with a shrug when you tried to discuss it later. Don't take it personally. But it was personal. She was commenting on your life, your choices, your worth as a wife to her son. And you had to smile through it because maintaining family harmony was your job. If there was tension with his siblings, you smoothed it over. If his father made inappropriate comments, you laughed them off. If family gatherings were stressful and exhausting, you attended them anyway, bringing a homemade dish and wearing a pleasant expression. You became a diplomat in a country where you had no real power but all the responsibility. Meanwhile, interactions with your own family often got less priority. If there was a conflict between visiting his parents and yours, is usually won. Today we talk about boundaries with in-laws, about partners managing their own families. How many Sunday dinners did you endure while screaming internally? Any outside work or interests couldn't interfere with home duties. Some women did work outside the home in the 1970s. Teachers, nurses, secretaries, but even then, it was understood that this job was secondary, almost a hobby, certainly not a career that took precedence over wifely duties. You worked part-time, preferably while the kids were in school, and you still came home and cooked a full dinner from scratch. You still cleaned the house to that impossible standard. You still managed all the emotional labor, the scheduling, the mental load of running a household. Your job might contribute to the family finances, but it couldn't contribute to any disorder at home. No takeout because you were too tired to cook. No asking him to pick up the kids because you had to work late. No letting the laundry pile up because you'd been at work all day. You essentially worked two full-time jobs, but could only acknowledge one of them as legitimate. And if you wanted to pursue something ambitious, something that might actually become a serious career, forget it. That was threatening. That was selfish. That was putting your own desires ahead of your family's needs. You could volunteer at the church or the school. That was acceptable because it was service, an extension of your nurturing role. But ambition, drive, professional goals, those were unfeminine, dangerous to the marriage, potentially emasculating to your husband. Today, women have careers, lead companies, out-earn their spouses. How many brilliant minds were confined to part-time receptionist work? You were supposed to be cheerful, pleasant, and never moody or emotional. Your feelings had to be managed, controlled, packed away. Bad day? Smile through it. Frustrated with the monotony of your routine? Keep it to yourself. Angry about something he said or did? Wait until you calm down, then bring it up gently, carefully, in a way that doesn't sound like criticism. And whatever you do, don't cry. Crying was manipulation, emotional blackmail, a woman's weapon when she didn't have a logical argument. Your hormones were always suspect. If you were upset, it was probably that time of the month, not a legitimate response to a legitimate problem. You learned to police your own emotions constantly, to present a carefully curated version of yourself that was palatable, manageable, unthreatening. You saved your tears for the shower, where the water would wash them away and no one would know. You vented your frustrations into your pillow at night, silent screams that no one heard. You developed stress headaches, stomach problems, mysterious ailments that doctors couldn't quite diagnose, but that were somehow always deemed psychosomatic. Meanwhile, his emotions were valid. His anger was justified. His frustrations deserved to be heard. He could slam doors, raise his voice, sulk for days over a perceived slight, and that was just him having feelings. You having feelings was you being difficult. Today, we understand emotional labor, validate women's anger, recognize that expressing feelings is healthy. What happened to all those swallowed emotions? Every night, you were supposed to ensure he went to bed satisfied, in every sense of the word. Let's talk about the thing that often gets whispered around when we discuss this era, but it was real and it was expected. Marital intimacy wasn't about mutual desire or connection, it was about duty. You were supposed to be available, willing, enthusiastic, even when you were exhausted, even when you'd been touched by small children all day and wanted nothing more than to have your body to yourself for a few hours, even when you were angry with him, hurt by something he'd said, feeling disconnected and unappreciated. There was this understanding, often explicitly taught by mothers to daughters, that this was part of the bargain. He went to work, you managed the house, and fulfilled his needs. All his needs. Your own desires were largely irrelevant to the equation. In fact, enjoying it too much might make you seem improper, but not enjoying it at all might send him looking elsewhere, and that would be your fault for not keeping him satisfied. You were supposed to walk this impossible line between available and demure, willing but not wanted. And if you were tired, if you tried to say no or suggest waiting until another night, there was often this pressure, this guilt. You were being a bad wife. You were neglecting your duties. You were pushing him away. The concept of enthusiastic consent, of both partners' desires mattering equally, of intimacy as mutual connection rather than service, that wasn't part of the conversation. Today we talk about sexual autonomy, about desire and consent, about partnerships where both people's wants matter. How did it shape you to treat your own body as something you didn't fully own? You were expected to keep all family secrets, presenting a perfect image to the outside world. Every family had things that stayed behind closed doors, and you were the guardian of those secrets, the PR manager of your household's public image. Financial struggles? Nobody needed to know that you were stretching every dollar, that sometimes you fed the kids first and ate their leftovers, that you'd been wearing the same 3 dresses for 2 years because there was no money for anything new. Marital problems? You'd never breathe a word, even to your closest friends. If he drank too much, if he was cold or cruel or absent, if you felt lonely in your own marriage, that stayed locked inside. Problems with the kids? You handled it privately, never admitting that your son was struggling in school or your daughter was acting out, because that reflected poorly on your parenting, which meant it reflected poorly on you. Even small things remained hidden. You didn't complain that you were overwhelmed. You didn't admit that you sometimes fantasized about running away. You didn't confess that some days you locked yourself in the bathroom just to have 5 minutes alone and cried for no reason you could name. The family's reputation rested on your ability to make everything look effortless, happy, normal. You were the editor of your family's story, cutting out all the messy, painful, true parts and showing only the sanitized version that matched everyone else's sanitized version. You all colluded in this massive fiction that everyone was fine, everything was perfect, no one was struggling. Today we're more honest about our struggles, sharing real moments on social media, admitting when we're not okay. What would it have meant to tell the truth? You kept the photo albums, organized the memories, documented the family history. This task seems sweet at first, preserving precious memories, until you realize you were literally the keeper of everyone else's history, while your own story got erased. You took the photos, or more often, you were the one behind the camera, which meant you appeared in fewer pictures. You developed the film, selected the best shots, carefully mounted them in albums with those corner holders, wrote captions underneath in your neat handwriting. Tommy's first day of school, 1972. Family vacation, summer 1975. Christmas morning, you documented his achievements, the kids' milestones, family gatherings. You saved the kids' artwork, their report cards, their baby teeth in little boxes. You kept the family calendar, noting important dates, anniversaries, accomplishments. You were the archivist of a family story in which you were somehow both central and invisible. Years later, someone would flip through those albums and see him, see the kids, see the house, the dog, the holiday. They'd see the life you built, but they'd rarely see you because you were too busy creating the record to be in it. And the emotional memories, the full story of what those years felt like, what you experienced, what you sacrificed, that wasn't documented anywhere. That lived only in your head. And sometimes you wondered if it had even been real since no evidence remained. Today we have thousands of selfies, digital records of our own lives from our own perspectives. If you could have documented your real story, what would those images have shown? You were supposed to defer to his expertise on everything, even in your own areas of knowledge. This might be the most quietly infuriating item on this list. You could have a college degree in biology, but when the conversation turned to science at a dinner party, you'd smile and nod while he explained photosynthesis incorrectly, and you wouldn't correct him. You could have grown up on a farm, spent your whole childhood learning about plants and soil and growing seasons, but when it came time to decide what to plant in the garden, his opinion carried more weight. You could have read extensively about child development, studied parenting techniques, spent every waking hour with your children, but when he came home and declared some new parenting rule, you'd implement it even if you knew it wouldn't work. Your knowledge was soft, domestic, somehow less legitimate than his, regardless of what you actually knew. And if you did dare to correct him, to share your expertise, to insist that you were right about something, there was a cost. You were being a know-it-all. You were embarrassing him. You were challenging his authority. So you learned to share information, indirectly, to plant seeds of ideas and let him think he'd come up with them, to phrase your expertise as questions. Do you think maybe I read somewhere that what if we tried? You made yourself smaller, less certain, less knowledgeable than you actually were. Today we celebrate women's expertise, recognize qualified voices regardless of gender. How much intelligence went unspoken? The garage, the yard, the car. These were his domains, even if you did the work. Here's the thing about those supposedly masculine spaces. The boundaries were enforced even when they made no sense. He controlled the garage, but you were the one who swept it, organized it, knew where every tool was because you'd hung them on their pegboard hooks. The yard was his responsibility, but you weeded the flower beds, watered the lawn when he forgot, pruned the bushes, planted the annuals that made everything colorful. The car was his domain, but you drove it every day, took it for oil changes, kept it clean inside, knew exactly which strange noise meant something was wrong. Yet, when the neighbors came over, they'd compliment him on the neat garage, the lovely yard, the well-maintained car, and he'd accept those compliments without correction, without acknowledgement that you'd done most of the actual work. If something broke, you weren't supposed to fix it yourself, even if you knew how. You were supposed to tell him about it and wait for him to handle it, even if that meant waiting weeks while the thing remained broken and you found workarounds. A woman using power tools raised eyebrows. A woman changing her own oil was trying to prove something. A woman building something without male supervision was just asking for it to fall apart. You had to pretend incompetence in certain areas to preserve his role as household expert and protector. Today we know competence has no gender, that anyone can learn anything. How often did you pretend you couldn't do something you absolutely could? You were supposed to age gracefully, which meant aging invisibly. There's this cruel irony embedded in expectations for women of that era. You were supposed to stay youthful and attractive, but you weren't supposed to look like you were trying too hard, and you absolutely weren't supposed to acknowledge that you were aging at all. The gray hairs got colored at home, in your bathroom, the chemical smell filling the house, a towel around your shoulders while you painted the dye on, carefully rinsed it out, hoped the color matched. The wrinkles got creamed and massaged, those nighttime rituals with cold cream and special serums that promised to turn back time. The changing body got corseted, controlled, hidden under clothes cut to flatter and conceal. But you couldn't talk about any of it. You couldn't complain about aging or fear it aloud because that was vain and shallow. You were supposed to accept it gracefully while simultaneously fighting it constantly. Meanwhile, he got distinguished. His gray hair made him look sophisticated. His lines showed character. His softening body was evidence of good living. The double standard was so embedded that you probably didn't even question it. You just bought more face cream and scheduled your hair appointments and tried to hold back time with your bare hands. Today we talk about aging as a privilege, about earned wrinkles and silver hair as beautiful. Did you ever get to just exist in your changing body without shame? Every interaction with other men had to be above reproach, monitored, limited. Friendships with men basically didn't exist for married women, not real ones. You could chat with male neighbors in broad daylight while your kids played, but anything deeper than surface pleasantries raised questions. You could work alongside men, but you kept it strictly professional, never having lunch alone, never lingering in conversation. You were friendly but not too friendly, polite but distant, always aware of how interactions might look to others. Because your faithfulness wasn't just about your actual behavior, it was about perception. You couldn't give anyone any reason to question your virtue, to suspect impropriety, to whisper about you. An innocent friendship could become neighborhood gossip. A kind gesture from a male colleague could be misinterpreted. You policed your own interactions constantly, maintaining careful distance, building walls around yourself even in casual social situations. Meanwhile, he could have female friends, could mention going to lunch with his secretary, could tell stories about his funny coworker, and no one questioned it. His faithfulness was assumed. Yours had to be constantly demonstrated. You lived in a smaller world, cut off from half the population in any meaningful way, because your reputation was more important than your actual autonomy. Today we have friends of all genders, professional networks, normal human interactions. How lonely was that careful distance? You were expected to make holidays magical through sheer invisible labor. Let's talk about Christmas or Thanksgiving or Easter, or any holiday that supposedly brought families together in joy and celebration. Those magical memories? You built them with your own hands, week by week, hour by hour. Starting in November, you'd begin planning Christmas. The cards, you bought them, addressed them in your careful handwriting, included those family photo cards that showed everyone smiling. You signed his name along with yours even though he'd never seen the cards before they went out. The decorations, you dragged them from the attic, untangled the lights, fluffed the artificial tree branches, hung every ornament. The shopping, you bought gifts for everyone, wrapped them beautifully, labeled them, hid them, kept track of who got what. The cookies, you baked dozens, those intricate cutouts that required rolling and cutting and decorating, each one a tiny work of art. The meals, you planned the menu, bought the groceries, prepared dishes that took days of advance work. The cleaning, you made the house spotless because family would visit. And through all of this, you maintained the illusion of effortless magic. Christmas morning arrived, the kids squealed with delight. He relaxed with his coffee while wrapping paper flu, and everyone marveled at how wonderful it all was. Later, you'd hear, she really outdid herself this year, as if you were a magician, pulling rabbits from hats rather than a woman who'd been working herself to exhaustion for 6 weeks. Today, we share holiday labor, acknowledge the work, sometimes simplify or skip traditions when they're too much. How many holidays did you watch from behind a camera or through a kitchen doorway? You never went to bed angry, which really meant you always apologized first. This sounds like reasonable relationship advice, until you examine what it meant in practice. After an argument, and it didn't matter who was right, what had been said, how hurt you were. You were the one who broke the silence. You were the one who smoothed things over. You were the one who said, let's not fight, or I'm sorry, or can we just forget about it? Even if you were the wronged party, even if he'd said something cruel, even if the issue remained unresolved, because keeping the peace was your responsibility. Maintaining harmony was your job. He could stew in his anger, let it fill the house like cold fog, go, silent for hours or days. And that was just him processing his feelings. But you couldn't let tension linger. You couldn't hold a grudge. You couldn't insist that something be resolved before moving forward. So you swallowed your anger, your hurt, your need for actual resolution, and you initiated reconciliation. You touched his shoulder tentatively. You brought him coffee as a peace offering. You asked if he wanted to talk about it, fully prepared for him to say no, and for you to accept that non-resolution as resolution. Over the years, you learned that your feelings were less important than household tranquility, that you could be hurt as long as you didn't stay hurt where anyone could see it. Today we know that healthy conflict resolution requires both parties, that going to bed angry sometimes means taking space to cool down, that apologizing first doesn't mean you were wrong. How many apologies did you give for things you didn't do? So here we are, at the end of this checklist. That wasn't really a checklist. It was a job description for an impossible position. Perfect wife, perfect mother, perfect homemaker, perfect hostess, perfect companion, all while remaining perfectly invisible in your own life. The 1970s weren't ancient history. These expectations lived in your mother's life, your grandmother's life, maybe even touched your own life in ways you're still unpacking. And here's what's remarkable. Women did it. They met these impossible standards, or they tried, or they broke themselves trying. They created order from chaos, made houses into homes, raised children, supported spouses, and kept everything running smoothly while receiving little recognition, less appreciation, and almost no acknowledgement that what they were doing was actual work requiring actual skill. Things have changed, haven't they? We've dismantled some of these expectations, questioned others, created space for different ways of being a partner, a parent, person. But if you're honest, you can probably still feel echoes of this checklist in modern life. The mental load still falls disproportionately on women. The expectation to have it all has just added career achievement to all these domestic requirements, rather than subtracting any of them. We've made progress, but we're still negotiating the terms of partnership, still fighting to have our labor recognized and valued, still working to create relationships built on actual equality rather than these inherited scripts. If this trip down memory lane stirred something in you, recognition, frustration, gratitude that things have changed, or anger that they haven't changed enough, leave a comment. Tell me which item on this list hit hardest. Tell me if your mother or grandmother lived this reality. Tell me what we still need to talk about when it comes to the invisible work that holds families together. And if you found this interesting, if it made you think or feel or remember, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that dig into how we used to live and what it tells us about how we live now. Because these aren't just stories about the past. They're mirrors, showing us where we've been and helping us see where we still need to go. Thanks for watching. If you had a good time, keep the adventure alive by clicking on one of the suggested videos on your screen right now for more amazing content.